Boldwood presents Just Do It, written by Maxine Morrey and read by Gloria Sanders. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Chapter 1. I stared at my boss, her words echoing around my brain. I had been so sure this time. "I'm so sorry," she repeated. "I was positive they'd choose you. You're still the best candidate as far as I'm concerned." I opened my mouth to ask a question, but instead of words, a hoarse, raspy noise emerged. "Would you like some water?" Ines asked, her tone soft and soothing as she poured me a plastic cupful without waiting for an answer and placed it on the desk in front of me. The only sound was the glug of bubbles from the dispenser as the level settled. I took a few gulps of the icy cold drink, cleared my throat, then tried again with my question. "Do you know who they went with instead?" She gave a shrug and busied herself topping up the cup. Something smelled fishy. "Ines?" My boss returned to her seat and met my eyes for the briefest moment before looking away again and unnecessarily tidying her already highly organised desk. My desk was not tidy. My desk was never tidy. I liked the aesthetic of tidy, the thought of it. It was just that I could never quite manage the actual task. Or if I did, the result would last less than a day before it looked like a bunch of tomb raiders had upended everything in search of buried treasure. Not that they'd find any. At least not in my office. The London museum I worked in, however, had plenty. And those I was meticulous about cataloguing and storing carefully with the reverence the items deserved. "But I've been instrumental in acquiring some of our most popular exhibits," I said. "I know." Ines shook her head. "And we're all incredibly grateful for the brilliant relationship and rapport we now have with the various museums and collectors in Egypt." "So, who do the board think is the best person for overseeing what could be one of the most important digs for decades?" Then mumbled something as she turned to rummage in her Kate Spade handbag. "Pardon? I didn't quite catch that." I asked her to repeat as I raised my cup and attempted to wet my suddenly dry throat. She faced me and spoke again. Clearer this time, but with a pained look on her elfin features. "Friedrich Klein." It was amazing how much water was actually in a sip. There was enough, certainly, to go down my throat, but apparently that still left plenty to find a route down my nose. I swiped at my face with my cardigan before taking the tissue offered by a concerned Ines. "I'm sorry," she said, as I took another and honked out an unladylike blow, causing my left ear to pop. "I don't understand the decision at all. I mean, he's a good archaeologist, but he doesn't have as much expertise in the subject as you, or your connections." "He has the names of a few people, I know that much. Stupidly, I shared them with him before I realised he was a cheating—" I snapped my mouth shut, grabbed a pencil, and drew a few quick hieroglyphs on a piece of paper. "Inventive use of a dead language." "I like to keep my hand in." "Still, even if he has those names, I can't think he has the relationship you do with any of them." "No, but he has things I don't have." "What's that?" "Money and charm." "Ah." "Yes, ah." Friedrich had grown up in a castle, a proper, honest-to-God, Disney-worthy castle. His parents still lived there, amongst the gilded framed paintings of ancestors long deceased. There was a portrait of Friedrich, too, that I'd seen on my own visits. The painter had been rather kind, I thought, and given my boyfriend at the time definition in his pecs and biceps that wasn't necessarily a true representation of the sitter. Friedrich certainly wasn't complaining. I wasn't into all those muscled types anyway. People's intelligence was the most attractive thing to me. Friedrich had a nice face, although I did wonder how he was going to get on in the desert with his insistence on wearing contacts. "Glasses are so cliché," he told me when I'd questioned him about it. "They are too central to the classic image of the nerd. I refuse to be objectified and turned into the public's idea of what an archaeologist looks like." I think most people think archaeologists either look like Indiana Jones or Lara Croft. Friedrich had given me a glare. Hollywood's interpretations of archaeologists over the years was one of his pet hates, so I'd changed tack. "I do think you're overreacting about insisting on contact lenses all the time. Lots of people, millions, in fact, who aren't archaeologists wear glasses. It's not like we have dibs on them." "So, fine. You wear them." I'd frowned. "I don't need them." "And now you're going to rub in the fact I have myopia?" "No, I wasn't. You know I wouldn't do that. I just don't..." "Just don't what?" "Think it's as big a deal as you're making it out to be." "Then we will agree to disagree and move on with our evening." And we had. That time and all the others. It's kind of a thing with academics. Whatever the field, hardly anyone wants to agree with anyone else. I don't know why. I've always thought that we'd probably know a lot more about things if we all just tried to get along. "Are you okay?" Ines brought me back to the present. "Yes. Well, no, I'm disappointed, obviously." "Obviously, we all are. It would have been great for the museum as well as you personally, and off the record..." She gave a furtive look around. "I think it's a shitty decision." Despite the crushing disappointment that had taken up residence in my chest, giving me severe indigestion pains, I felt the corners of my mouth tingle as they fought a smile. My boss never swore she didn't like anyone else to. I'd smacked my shin against a stone sarcophagus lid one time whilst working with her. I'd cut my leg open and achieved a bruise from ankle to kneecap, and the most I felt I could let out was, "Oh, fudge!" It really had been most unsatisfying. "Ines," I said, the smile forcing its way through despite having just lost, quite literally, the opportunity of a lifetime. "I know." She blushed, and the tips of her ears went pink. "Extreme circumstances call for extreme language." This was not extreme for me, and I could guarantee I'd be letting loose a whole string of expletives at the top of my voice the moment the opportunity arose. But for my boss, this was... Don't you tell a soul I said it. I drew a cross over my heart and made a zipping motion across my lips. She put her hand across the desk and laid it over one of mine. "And I really am sorry." I nodded, pushed the chair back, and went back to my office. "So, when are you going?" Bella, perched on a pile of books, whispered excitedly as I entered the room. "I'm not." She straightened. "What?" "I'm not going." "I don't understand." "The board chose someone else to lead the dig." "Who?" she snapped. "You're the best person for that job and everyone knows it." Apparently not. So who got it? She asked again. Friedrich, I replied without looking up. Son of a... Bella? Peter, our intern, knocked lightly on my open door. I would close it, but there was too much stuff in front of the door, so I pretended I liked it that way. Although right now, I just wanted to be left alone. There's someone on the phone for you from Denmark. She jumped up. I have to take this, but we'll talk, okay? I'm fine, really. There will be other opportunities. We both knew this was a big fat lie, but the sentence sufficed to let my colleague know that while I appreciated her concern, I was done talking about it. At least for now. Bella and Peter walked away and I pulled out my phone. Drinks. Tonight. A lot of them. Kiss, kiss. Colette's reply came back quickly. Time to celebrate, oui? Kiss, kiss. Commiserate. The next moment, my phone rang. Quoi? Colette was French, spoke 5 languages fluently, worked as an in-demand translator all over the world, and often dropped back into her native tongue in times of high emotion or extreme tiredness. They gave it to someone else. That is out of the question. You are the only possible candidate. So everyone keeps saying, but in the end, they decided to go with Friedrich. Colette's intake of breath was so loud and naturally dramatic that it almost made me laugh, except I was beyond laughing. Tonight, what time? What time can you leave? I asked. I've just finished a job, so I'm already in town. I'll meet you here. I'm going to try and leave as soon as possible. I'm sure Ines will be fine. She's as... I dropped my voice to a whisper. She even swore. She did not. Uh-huh. But I can't tell you what she said because I promised. Oh, they are idiots, the whole lot of them. Get out as soon as you can. A quick trip home, a shower and a change of clothes later, I was on the tube back into town to meet Colette. I didn't usually mind the ride, it gave me time to think. But right now I didn't want to think. I wanted to numb every single neuron I had. It was a short-term solution, admittedly, but it was still a solution. Cheers! I clashed my glass a little too forcefully against Colette's, and the barman swapped it for one that didn't have a fissure in it. Thanks, I said as he handed it back. No problem, happens all the time. And on top of everything, I said, my voice raised to be heard over the ebullient Friday evening crowd. I got an email just before I left. Apparently, the project manager for the extension to the museum is going to be sharing my office. Why? I shrugged and sloshed my drink over the rim. I don't know, I said, then swiped my finger up the glass to catch the blood-red wine before sucking the excess off. Waste not, want not. As I did, I locked eyes with a man from the large group near us who were clearly in a more celebratory mood than we were. He turned away, but there was no mistaking the smile on his face. I think you have an admirer, Colette said, her accent thicker now we were several hours into our commiseration. Pfft, I said, before downing a good proportion of the glass. He's good-looking. Why don't you go talk to him? Take your mind off things. Because he's probably married, or gay, or an arsehole, or an archaeologist. Anyway, I don't want to talk to him. I want to talk to you. Okay. She put her hand on mine. They won't all be assholes, you know. How come you can say any word and it sounds sexy? Even arseholes sounds sexy with your accent. It's an unfair advantage. Oui, c'est vrai, but this world is cutthroat. You have to use what you have, no? Oui, I replied, unintentionally imitating her. I'm just not sure now that what I have is enough. I twiddled with the stem of the glass now resting on the bar. I was perfect for this job, Cole. And I still didn't get it. I don't know what else I can do. Then perhaps you weren't supposed to... What? She did one of those Gallic shrugs. Life is a strange thing. Sometimes what we think we want is not actually what we want at all. I bloody well did want it. Okay, I'm just trying to help. She didn't take offence. I didn't drink much, and I wasn't a horrible drunk, but I was an emotional one. And I'm glad to see your French side is finally coming out. I didn't actually have a French side, but my BFF joked that alcohol made me less English and more French. That means it's time to party. She gave me a wink and glanced over to the group behind us. One of the other blokes smiled widely. Men tended to do that when Colette was around, and headed towards us. Evening, ladies. Could I buy you both a drink? That would be lovely. Colette did a little head tilt, and the guy lapped it up. Two champagnes, please. He didn't even blink, merely caught the bartender's eye and placed the order. Are you waiting for someone? No, it's just us. She smiled back, and his own smile widened. A bunch of us are here for a friend's birthday. Why don't you come and join us? Oh, we wouldn't want to intrude. He waved his hand. The more the merrier. I'm Greg, by the way. Colette placed a hand on her chest before indicating me. Colette and Elizabeth. Enchantée. God, I love the French accent. It's so... He waved his hands. You know, he said, looking from Colette and then to me. Oui, Colette said simply, before taking the drinks that the barman placed in front of us while her new friend paid. She gave a wink as she handed one to me and clinked my glass gently. To new opportunities. I let out a sigh. When Colette went into party mode, I'd long ago learned that it was easier to go along with it, and the group certainly looked like they were having a good time. Why the hell not? I'd put everything I had into that application, and what had I got? Nada. I bloody well deserved some fun. To new opportunities, I repeated, and swigged at my glass, relishing the fizz on my tongue and the bubbles tickling my nose. He definitely likes you, Colette slurred a little while later. Somehow her accent even made slurring sexy. He does not, I replied, before turning and frowning at her. Who? Finn, the tall one who's hardly been able to keep his eyes off you. Oh, pff. Why don't you talk to him? I did. I mean alone, not as a group. She made a swirling motion with her hands encompassing all of us in said group. If he's so keen, he'd have talked to me, wouldn't he? I asked, fixing a slightly smug expression on my face, pleased with my razor-sharp reasoning. Can I get you a drink? The deep voice close to my ear made me jump, and I threw the remainder of my drink down my dress. Well, yes, you can now. My remonstration tailed off as I turned to find Finn's face unexpectedly close. He was even hotter this close up. Sorry, I didn't mean to startle you. It's just pretty loud in here. I definitely owe you a drink now. I mean, yes, you do. Colette elbowed me sharply in the ribs whilst doing a brilliant impression of having turned to her companion and not listening in to our conversation at all. Ow! I mean, yes, that would be lovely, thank you. Another champagne? Oh, you don't have to. I can pick something else. Finn's brow crinkled, sinking into the faint lines that appeared to linger there all the time. Do you want something else? His eyes were the blue of Tutankhamun's eyeliner, and they seemed to pierce straight into my thoughts. Not really. An amused smile replaced the frown. Then champagne is what you shall have. Back in a sec. Excuse me just a moment. I heard Colette put her conversation on hold. Oh my God, he's so into you, I knew it, she whispered to me. You're overreacting, it's just a drink. Did you see the way he looked at you? Not really, I replied honestly. The whole world seems to have gone kind of soft focus. I looked around. It's actually quite nice. Colette prodded me. Huh? Okay. Yes, he seems quite attentive. And do you think that's good? A grin pushed its way onto my face. It's good. Colette winked, then turned back to Greg, who'd been hanging on her every word since we met. Before long, Finn returned. Here you go, he said, waiting until I had a good grip of the glass before letting go. Sorry again about... Not a problem. This dress has had worse things than champagne spilled on it. Oh. The dark brows knitted once more. I'm not quite sure what to say to that. I took a massive gulp of the drink. That didn't come out like it was supposed to. I just meant... Accidents happen? Yes, I said, pointing my glass at him and sloshing a plop of liquid on his pale blue shirt. Oh, God, sorry, I said, yanking my sleeve down over my hand and wiping at his chest manically. Finn caught my hand and wrapped it within his own. It'll dry. Oh, right, yes. And you've spilled worse things on it? I attempted some witty repartee and failed. Actually, it's brand new. Oh, God, I said, attempting to pull my hand back, but Finn held on, gently but firmly. But give me time. I have a twin niece and nephew who I see a lot, so I'm sure its time will come. I looked up from under the fake lashes Colette had, by message, insisted I wear for the occasion, and met his eyes. Really? It's okay. Relax. Oh, she's not very good at that. Colette leant back, adding her thoughts to our conversation. I'm perfectly capable of relaxing, I said, turning so that my back was to her. And what do you do to relax? Finn asked. I like to read. About her job, Colette poked her head over my shoulder. I love my job, so sue me. Finn and Greg exchanged a glance and apparently decided it was going to be easier to talk as a small group and moved accordingly. Finn, your lovely companion there is Elizabeth and this is Colette. Enchantée, Finn replied and my friend beamed. Maybe we should swap, she said, throwing a glance at me, but I'd seen the way she was looking at Greg, and even through my alcoholic haze I knew she was teasing. His smile, however, faded for a moment. She's joking, I reassured him. She's just the most enormous flirt. Oh, bah, she said. I merely appreciate manners. Finn's got all the smooth lines, Greg replied, nodding at his mate. It's amazing any of the rest of us get a look in. Very funny, Finn replied. From the glance he shot his mate, there was definitely another layer of meaning in his reply, but my brain, and quite happily, now dozing inside my skull. And it was way too much effort to think about anything that deep. Greg smiled and grabbed his friend good-naturedly around the shoulders, something he had to reach up to do despite being taller than Colette, who in turn was taller than me. Finn towered over all of us. You can call me Lizzie. Everyone does. Finn studied me for a moment. I think Elizabeth suits you better. I beamed to the point that it actually hurt. You do? I do, he replied, his own smile now showing. I prefer Elizabeth too, but you know how it goes. I do. Handy having a name no one can shorten. I nodded sagely. Very wise, I replied, as if Finn himself had had something to do with choosing his own appellation. So, what is it that you do? He asked. I peered at him over the top of my glass. Colette said you enjoy reading about your job. Oh, I'm an archaeologist. His brows shot up. Really? I said, as I swigged the rest of my drink. This should probably be my last. I'd lost count of how many I had had, which was never a good sign. And then the spectre of lost opportunity drifted past my mind's eye. If I could still remember that, it was likely a sign I hadn't had enough. So you go on digs and stuff? I nodded. When they're not swiped from under my nose? I have been, yes. Wow, interesting. Colette's hand found mine and she gave it a squeeze. Even plastered, she knew I didn't want to talk about work right now. But, she announced to our small group, we are here to forget about work, so allez, impress us with your sparkling conversation. Uh-oh, now we're really in trouble. Finn grinned and disappeared behind his glass. Sorry if I brought up a sore subject earlier, Finn said once Colette was finally satisfied I was capable of holding my own conversation, and Finn had found us a corner table, pulling the chair out for me as he did so. It's fine. I just had a bit of a crappy day. Hence hitting the bar. Hence hitting the bar, I agreed. I get the impression that this isn't the way you generally like to enjoy it. I rested my chin in my hands. Uh-oh, busted. I'm sorry you had a bad day, but I am happy you ended up here. I met his gaze. Me too. Your friend seems happy about it as well. He turned his head to where Colette and Greg were getting extremely cosy, her head resting on his chest, his head tilted down talking to her. So does yours. True. Can I ask you something? Finn received a shrug in reply. Does she do this a lot? My elbows had been sliding down the table, but at this I sat up straight. What? Finn held up his hands. I don't mean any disrespect, I'm just... Greg seems really keen. He's not a one-night stand kind of bloke, I just... Wanted to know if Colette is a one-night stand kind of girl? Maybe you should have swapped if that's what you think of her. I don't think that, he replied, his tone still calm. I don't think anything. I try not to judge people because more often than not we get it wrong. And you've got it wrong now. About this wrong, I said, stretching my arms out as far as they would go to add what I felt was the required emphasis. She's not. I studied the pair of them for a moment. Actually, I haven't seen her look this interested in a long time. He's a good bloke, Finn replied before I'd even voiced the question. I turned back to face him. And what about you? A mischievous smile hooked itself on the corners of the generous mouth and tugged them up. I'm pretty good too. Turned out he wasn't kidding. Finn kicked the door shut, his hands never leaving my body as he backed me into the wall of his hallway. His mouth was on mine, my hands locked behind his neck as he bent to reach me. I'd worn my highest heels tonight as part of my armour against the world, but even those weren't enough to even up my 5'3" frame to meet Finn's height of 6'5". His hands slid from my waist to under my bum, and the next moment I was level with him, my legs automatically wrapping around his waist. "Much better," he murmured, his eyes dark with lust before his mouth once again claimed mine. Chapter 2. I forced one eye open and peered out at the unfamiliar. Light was flooding into the modern, incredibly tidy apartment through large windows. An apartment I didn't recognise. Where was I? A noise behind me made me freeze, and I held my breath. After a few moments, I steeled myself enough to turn my head, careful not to make too much movement. And there it was. Evidence of what happens when you make a very poor life decision on the back of someone else making a very poor work decision. I was looking straight at the incredibly hot, thankfully still sleeping, face of Finn. Oh my God! I had not only had a one-night stand, which I never did, like ever, but I didn't even know his last name. Shit, I needed to get out of here. Slowly, I shifted again, careful to make as little movement as possible under the pure white cotton sheets. Wonderfully silky, soft sheets that had a several hundred thread count start over my own. I slid one leg out, then one arm, following it with the other leg until I slithered silently to the floor like a knackered, exceedingly hungover snake. Moving as quietly as possible, I scrabbled around locating various bits of clothing until I had it all but my bra. Where the hell is it? I rummaged back through the fuzzy memories of last night, trying to remember when that particular item of clothing had come off. Certain moments of the evening were pretty damn clear, and something I did remember is that I'd already had one surprisingly quick and apparently satisfyingly loud orgasm, if the grin on Finn's face was anything to go by, before half my clothes were off. That rather set the tone for the rest of the night, and the early hours of the morning. No wonder he was still sleeping. He'd had a pretty good workout. Muscles I'd forgotten about were already making themselves known, but my sodding bra remained missing in action. Typically, it was my favourite, most expensive one. Of course it was. Movement from the bed made me duck down beside it, holding my breath. A few moments later, the deep, even breathing of the man I'd left behind in the warm bed resumed, and I decided I was going to have to abandon my search and head out. The thought of Finn waking up while I was still there filled me with mortification. Last night, he'd seen everything, and I didn't care. I'd wanted it all. I'd wanted him. But this morning, in the cold light of reality, I knew this was not me. I didn't do this. Relationships were long-term, cerebral, with deep, meaningful conversations, usually about, at least the two I'd had been. I didn't do frivolous, carefree, brain-exploding sex. Well, apart from last night. But that was a mistake. A huge, great pyramid-sized mistake, and the sooner I put it behind me, the better. I took one last glance. Even without champagne goggles on, Finn was still immensely good-looking. Far too gorgeous for his and my own good, as last night had indisputably proved. My phone rang almost the moment I grabbed it out of my bag, having unearthed said bag from under a cushion on the sofa, tiptoed from the freakishly tidy apartment, and closed the door behind me as quietly as possible. "Where are you?" I wrapped my coat around me as I answered Colette's call. The truth was, I had no idea where I was. Not ideal. I multitasked, bringing up the Maps app on my phone as I replied. Docklands. Oh my God. What? You totally stayed with Finn last night. So, I said, dragging up as much nonchalance as I could muster, which took far more effort than I had energy for. "Don't give me that. So, how was it?" "How was what?" "Lizzie." "It was fine." "Oh, dear." "What?" "Fine is not great." "Okay, it was more than fine." Now she was interested. "How much more than fine?" "Cole, could we not do this right now? I'm about to go into the tube station, and my brain feels like it's mid-mummification." "You're not rich enough." "What?" "You told me only the rich and people of note were mummified." Now you choose to remember interesting facts, I tell you. "I told you I listened." "Cole, I really need to just get home." I was the only one who was allowed to shorten my friend's name. "Okay, but call me later?" "I will." "Oh, God, I didn't ask you how your evening went." Colette gave a melodic laugh. "It was wonderful. Unlike you, I didn't fall into bed with him, though, so he's taking me to dinner tonight." "Ha ha. But good. You seemed pretty interested." "I really like him." Her voice was serious. "We sat talking until 3:30 this morning. Well, I'm not going to count my chickens, but yes, I like him." Colette had been burned badly once before, which had ended the marriage she'd truly thought would last forever. It had taken a long time for her to put herself out there again, and this was the first time I'd heard her take anyone remotely seriously. I remembered Finn's reassurance that Greg was a good bloke, and hoped he was right. The thought of Finn's voice kicked off a whole bunch of other memories that liquefied my stomach and sent flashes of heat to places they had no business being this early on a Saturday morning stood at the entrance to the tube. "Got to go, Col. I'll ring you later." "Okay, love you." "Love you too." So? It was Sunday afternoon, and Colette and I were huddled in a coffee shop in Finsbury Park. "So what?" "Are you seeing him again?" "Who?" She peered at me with a steady look over the rim of her swimming pool-sized hot chocolate. "No, I'm not." "Why not? You obviously like him, and he definitely likes you." "It was a mistake. A huge mistake." "Huge, eh?" Colette grinned wickedly, and I shot her a glare. "Not like that." "Oh, really? Well, that's disappointing." "What?" She made a gesture with her little finger. "No," I said, grabbing her hand and shoving it down out of sight whilst simultaneously subtly scanning the place to see if anyone had noticed. "It was—" Colette raised her brows in anticipation of my reply. "More than adequate." She shook her head, laughed, and returned to her cake. My friend had the ability to maintain her slim figure with apparently little effort. She swore by the French magic soup method of detox. I tried this once and couldn't even get a cupful down. How anyone could claim it was delicious was a clear misrepresentation. I'd swallowed some of the soup, also known as leek water, gagged, and bunged the leeks in a pan with potatoes and cream and made something edible instead. Fair enough, it didn't have the same bloat reduction properties as the original claimed, but it was bloody delicious. And I certainly didn't have to worry about calories this weekend. I must have burned about 10,000 on... Oh, God, what had I been thinking? Ooh, it was obviously way more than adequate. You're blushing. I am not blushing, don't be so ridiculous, it's warm in here. I made a point of pulling a book out of my bag and fanning myself with it. She gave me a look that I knew of old. She wasn't going to argue with me, but there would be no convincing her she was wrong, so I didn't bother. And on this occasion, she was right. So, why aren't you seeing him again? Because I'm not looking for anyone, and I'm certainly not looking for someone who picks up women in bars for one-night stands. He might think it was you who picked him up. It wasn't. I don't do things like that. I'd had way too much to drink. Why didn't you stop me? Because you looked like you were enjoying yourself for once. I enjoy myself plenty. She gave a one-shouldered shrug. But this time you looked like you were really letting go, relaxing. She did the shrug again. It was good to see. He could have been an axe murderer, and you let me go off with him. I asked Greg, he promised he wasn't. So, did he suggest meeting up again? I topped up my tea and stirred in some milk. Lizzie! What aren't you telling me? Nothing. And no, he didn't. And neither did you? Nope. Why not? We've been over this. Can we change the subject now, please? Reluctantly, Colette agreed and began to tell me about Greg. I smiled as I listened, trying to remember when I'd last seen her this happy. It was far longer than it should have been. She was totally and utterly smitten, and Greg sounded great. If he broke her heart, I was going to give him a practical demonstration of what the Egyptians did to people's brains during the mummification process. Right, well, I'd better get back. I need to go in earlier tomorrow and sort out my office. Really? I pulled a face. It's not that bad. Lizzie, Cleopatra's mummy could be in there under all that junk. It's not junk and you're exaggerating. If you say so. I do. How come you have to share your office anyway? I'd have thought they'd have been working from a porta cabina. That was the original plan, but the council got a bit uppity about it. They're not the prettiest things to look at, even temporarily. But, understandably, the board didn't want to make any more waves that might affect permission for the museum's extension, so we were asked to find another solution. Which is your office? Apparently so. Do you really mind? I know it didn't help getting that news after everything else on Friday. I peered into the teapot, checking that I had drained it before replacing the lid. Doesn't matter now, does it? It's happening anyway. Innes assured me that it would cause me minimum disruption. Good. I'd better get a move on. Are you coming? Colette looked momentarily shifty. I smiled. Greg's meeting you here, isn't he? Her own smile burst onto her face. Yes, is it that obvious? Who cares, if you're happy? That is true. We did the two-kiss thing, a habit Colette had never dropped, and I headed out of the cafe and back up the road towards my muse house. Colette lived close by and had an income to match the area. I'd inherited my place from my much-loved and much-missed grandmother. A fact that hadn't surprised my mother, even though it had floored me. You always were her favourite grandchild. Mum, I was her only grandchild. There you go, then. But it should go to you. Mum had touched my face and handed me a letter. I recognised the writing on the envelope. My name written in the loopy yet elegant strokes of my grandmother. My dearest Elizabeth. Now you're reading this, my time has come. I'd tell you not to be sad, but of course you will be, and quite right too. I was, of course, remarkable. Here she'd drawn a sketch of an elegant older woman looking out from the paper and winking at the reader. I'd always envied Gran's artistic talents. But in truth, my love, try not to be too sad for too long. I left you this house, which I know has probably surprised you, but I discussed it with your mother a long time ago. It's impossible to get on the property ladder nowadays, and I had the opportunity to help with that. I have so many happy memories of you being here, and I hope you have the same. It's yours now. Be free. And don't forget what I always told you. You are amazing. You can do anything you put your mind to. And if something's important to you, never give up. I love you. Gran. Kiss, 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 kiss. P.S. Do try and keep it tidy, darling. I'd cried for days. But moving out of the noisy house share and into Gran's house, my house, had helped me deal with my grief. I knew she'd be happy about that. The last part of her letter was the bit I had trouble with, and I hoped her spirit was still turning a blind eye to my mess 5 years later. Here's fine, I said, putting my end of the desk down close to the door and perpendicular to my own. Sure, Khalif said, wiping his brow with his sleeve. It will have to do, I said, pushing the chair I'd already wheeled from storage behind it. Beggars can't be choosers. Thanks for the help. No problem. I'm going to get back to cataloguing that collection of Roman coins that came in last week. Shout if you need any more help. If they want anything else, they can damn well get it themselves. My back is not happy. The request was a space for a desk, not to move the actual furniture. A deep voice came from the doorway. Khalif straightened and I spun around. Ines was smiling at me, but I could tell she wasn't impressed. We wanted to make you feel welcome, didn't we, Lizzie? I croaked, then cleared my throat. Yes, of course. So, as I said, you'll be sharing an office with Lizzie. She's our curator of collections and Egyptian antiquities. Lizzie, this is Finn Bryson, the project manager for the extension of the museum. Hi. He held out a shovel-sized hand and I stuck out my own. Nice to meet you. I focused on his eyes, but there was nothing. No sense of recognition, not even a flicker. He had absolutely no idea who I was. I was such an idiot. Yes, and you. Lizzie has been rather busy lately, so she's not had much of a chance to tidy up in here, but I'm sure it's on her to-do list today. Ines gave me a pointed look, and I fixed a smile. Mm-hmm. It was the only noise I could make with my teeth gritted. Not had a chance? I'd been in here since 6:00 this morning getting the place tidied, and that was the thanks I got. Flippin' charming. I'd better get downstairs and on site. Finn's deep tones jolted me out of my seething. Nice to meet you, Lizzie. Thanks, Ines. With that, he turned on his heel and walked off towards the lower floor where an underground extension was being carved out after years of planning and promises. Sorry about that, I said, pointing at the desk. Ines waved her hand. I don't care about the desk, he was right. You two could have hurt yourselves moving that. She knocked the wood of the piece. This is about 200 years old and weighs a ton. It felt more like 2. Is that the only one you could find? Yes. Well, there was an incredibly ugly metal one, but I've got to sit and look at it for months. So we opted for that. I bribed Khalif with whatever he wants from the posh sandwich shop across the road to move it with me. That sounds more like it, but I did ask you to tidy up this place, Ines continued, looking around. I did. Her head turned sharply towards me. You did? When? This morning. Were we robbed between then and now? Oh, ha. She touched my hand. I know it's not your thing, but can I ask you to try a little harder? Maybe put some of those books on shelves? Clear the floor a bit more. If health and safety come in here, we're in trouble. I'm using the books. Ines let out a sigh. You can still use them, just store them on the shelves when they're not on your desk. I eyed my desk. And by that I don't mean just move the pile to your desk. Damn. You're going to make a great mum, I laughed. You already have the mind-reading thing going on. She smiled back. I hope so. We've waited such a long time for this. She placed her hand on her stomach. Everything's going to be fine. Thanks, Lizzie. She walked to the door, turning as she left. But you still have to tidy up. I plopped down on the ergonomic chair that didn't go at all with the carved walnut desk, and thought about what. Jumping up, I grabbed my phone, ran over, and closed the door, pressing Colette's contact as I did so. Hi. It's Finn, I whispered. He's here. What do you mean? He's visiting the museum? I wish. He's the project manager for the build, the one I have to share an office with. Ooh la la. Have you spoken to him? Kind of. What does that mean? It means my boss introduced us and he told me it was nice to meet me. Oh? Maybe he wasn't sure how you wanted to play it. He doesn't even recognize me, Cole. I looked into his eyes. There was nothing. He has no idea who I am. Shit! Lizzie. Her voice was soft. I thought you were okay with that. I mean, not seeing him again. I am. I was. But now the bloke I went home with doesn't even remember me. Personally, I thought it was pretty memorable. But apparently not for him. I told you he was one of those men, and I bloody fell for it. Memorable, eh? Colette, you're focusing on entirely the wrong thing here. Yes, sorry. So what are you going to do? What can I do? I'm stuck with him for the next however many months. But just because he's sharing an office with me doesn't mean I have to engage in conversation. True. Although maybe a few little reminders might... I don't want to remind him. If he can't remember by himself, I'm sure as hell not going to beg him to cast his mind back and dredge up his drunken conquests. Bit dramatique, ma chérie, but I get the point. Did you tidy up your office? Yeah, and Ines just told me to tidy it again. Ah, do you need some help? No, it's fine. Don't just make more piles. I've told you that before. Stop ganging up on me. Right. I'm going to have to go and tidy my office. Good luck, and keep me posted. I hung up and got to work, ruining the day I set eyes on Finn Bryson. I then rued the board and the sponsors and the decision-making committee for the Egypt dig, and Friedrich. It turned out there was quite a lot of rude, which at least passed the time, as I once again tackled my office. Wow. Finn stopped at the door. I kept my head lowered, focused on my work. Thanks for clearing up in here. I hope it didn't put you out too much. I squeezed the last atom of life out of the stress ball on my lap. It was either that or Finn, and the second involved too much paperwork. No problem. I'd been planning to anyway, I just hadn't got around to it. I went back to work. Right. Silence hung heavy in the air between us, broken only by my somewhat furious typing. Showing no mercy, eh? I looked up and across at Finn, frowning. The keyboard. I'm afraid if my typing is going to disturb you, you may have to make other arrangements for your workstation. No, I didn't mean... He shook his head. I was just trying to make conversation. He has no recollection of me in his bed on Friday night, but now he wants to make conversation. Oh, I see. Sorry, but I'm rather busy. Yeah, Ines said you're arranging some big exhibition? Yes, that's right. I focused back on my screen. What's it about? Politeness forced me to squelch the enormous sigh I wanted to let out. The pharaohs of Egypt, I replied, not looking at him. Sounds interesting.